Hello, I'm Dr Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to, well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Have you ever felt like you don't belong at the table, or that one day soon, maybe even today, someone's going to question whether or not you're qualified for your role, or that you'll be found out or exposed as a fraud? If you've had these thoughts and experienced anxiety around these ideas, you, like me, and like today's guest, and like so many others, have experienced what we know as imposter syndrome, but today's guest is going to talk to us about a rebrand. If you can relate, even if you can't, you are going to learn so much from today's wonderful guest. Dr. Jill Stoddard is a renowned psychologist, author, speaker, and co-host of the incredible podcast Psychologists Off the Clock. She's passionate about sharing science-backed ideas from psychology to help people thrive. Her third book, due for release September 2023, is called Imposter No More: Overcome Self-doubt and Imposterism to Cultivate a Successful Career. Jill joins us from Newburyport, which is a coastal city in Massachusetts, where she lives with her husband, 2 kids, and a disobedient French Bulldog. Jill, welcome. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you from across the globe.
I know the wonders of modern technology. It's just brilliant. Your colleague, Yael, was recently on my podcast, as you know, and she recommended that we could have a chat. And this is a subject that, goodness, I'm so excited to dive into. And I'm really keen to, first of all, find out about this rebrand. Tell us about imposterism versus imposter syndrome.
Yeah, well, I love starting from that place. So when this phenomenon was first identified, it was in 1978 by doctors Clance and Imes. They called it the imposter phenomenon. And at that time, they thought it was something that really exclusively affected women. And then lo and behold, our pop culture world rebranded it as imposter syndrome. And I don't think that's coincidental, that something that they think occurs only in women is suddenly being labeled as a syndrome. Since then, we found out that it occurs in people other than women, though it appears to be more common among those who have had some history of marginalization, whether you're a person of color, an immigrant, someone with disabilities, any number of things. And in addition to that, this is something that research has shown affects up to 70% of people. And so if it affects up to 70% of people, and we think that it may also be partly a result of having experiences of being marginalized or oppressed, then it's not a syndrome. This is not like some psychopathology. This is like a really normal experience that happens because of contextual factors. And so I think Clance and Imes had it right when they called it the imposter phenomenon. And so I think we need to get back to that language, because language really matters. And whether it's the imposter phenomenon or imposter thoughts or feelings or experience, or I like to call it imposterism because it's short and easy, I think it's important for us to get away from that more stigmatizing, pathologizing term that's also inaccurate.
I agree with you. And it's very interesting to learn that it's so common, and that people who are more marginalized are more likely to experience it. Can we dive a little bit deeper into some of those details, please, Jill?
Yeah. Well, so I should start by saying there is a shockingly limited amount of rigorous scientific research around this. So if you do a Google search for imposter syndrome, you will get tens of millions of hits. But if you do a search in a scientific database for actual scientific studies that have been done, it's like 100 something. There really have been very few. And most of those are just kind of correlational studies that say like this is related to that, or this many people have it. And some of those studies show that women have it more frequently than men, and some of them show that it's equal. And no one has ever really looked specifically at what I think, like my hypothesis, and I would love if we have any listeners out there that are psychology researchers or like need a dissertation topic, I think this would be really cool, is if instead of just comparing men and women, if we compared women to men who have never had a history of marginalization. So this would typically be straight, white, cisgendered, heterosexual men. Then I think that is where we would ultimately end up seeing gender differences. And there are certainly plenty of men, whether they're men of color or even, if you're a man who maybe is like a stay-at-home dad or is an older person working in technology or sports. There are plenty of ways that even a white, straight, cis male can have some history of marginalization. So really, it seems to be the case that if you are someone who has a learning history that involves being told that you do not belong at all of the tables, then you're going to be more likely to question whether you belong at the tables, right? I always think of the example of, I'm Gen X. And so my mom grew up in the 60s, 70s, and her cohort of women were taught that you can be a secretary, a teacher, a nurse, or a mom. You didn't really have many other options. So I imagine that if you're a woman of that generation who wants to get into STEM or be a business entrepreneur, you're going to be more likely to experience imposterism because you've been pretty explicitly told you don't belong at those tables. So it's more of a hypothesis of mine and many other people too. It has been suggested by people well before me, but that it is likely that that kind of cultural messaging contributes to this. But really, there has not been much research at all to really bear this out. It's still an empirical question that needs to be answered, but it is a hypothesis that many people hold that it makes sense, like at face value, right? If you've been told that this space does not belong to you, then you may be more likely to question whether you belong. But it can also show up, let's say, for example, I'll give you my own personal example where this really reared its ugly head for me initially, or in the biggest way, not the first time, but the biggest way, is when I applied to graduate school. It's a competitive graduate school program, and I thought of myself as a pretty mediocre candidate, never thought that I would get in. And it turned out that my dad knew the program director. They had played golf together. They had played golf a couple times. They weren't friends, but they knew each other. They were friendly. And I was shocked when I got into the program, and it's been over 20 years, and I still worry that that's the only reason that I got in. And I realized that that does not give that program director very much credit, right? Like, he's not going to let someone into his program where only 12 people got accepted out of like 700 or 800 applicants if I'm not going to make him proud, right? If I'm going to reflect that program and do so poorly, probably they're not going to let me in just because he plays golf with my dad, right? And so logically, I understand that. But there's sort of just that like deep sense of insecurity. And so people might have that like, oh, because they did it because they were just being nice. They did it because I'm a legacy. They let me in because of affirmative action. They let me in because of nepotism. Those kinds of thoughts are reflective of that imposter experience.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience and to look at you. And this is the thing, it from a logical point of view, it doesn't make sense. But it's case in point with yourself, a TEDx speaker, 3 books, popular podcast, a renowned psychologist, a speaker. I mean, the accolades, the achievements, the experience, the expertise. And it's so interesting to see that even now there's a little tiny little niggle. And I know that you have the skills to manage that, to notice that, and to move forward despite that. But it's so common. It is so common that people who are incredibly high achieving can, even on face value to other people, are very deserving of exactly where they are and have worked very, very hard, can still feel that way. So perhaps now's a great time for those, look, I sort of question whether or not we need to do this, but let's do it. Let's define it, because I can't imagine that other people don't know exactly what we're talking about, but there will be listeners who haven't experienced this. So could you please define it for all of us? Because I think it's really interesting for us to hear it, even if we have lived with it. That would be really great.
Yeah, there are people who have never heard of it. And I tell the story in my book about, when I was telling my dad about a conference presentation that I was doing about imposter syndrome. And my dad is, a white, heterosexual, cisgendered male. There's a psychologist, Janet Helms, who's amazing. She gave a talk at a conference that I attended, and she referred to this as a WHIMP, a white heterosexual male of privilege, WHMP, white heterosexual male of privilege. And so I talk about this in my book. So my dad falls into all of those categories. He really doesn't have any history of marginalization. And he said to me, imposter syndrome, what the heck is that? And I explained it to him, thinking he would recognize the phenomenon, even if he didn't know what it was called. And he was utterly perplexed. When I explained to him what it was, he was like, I have zero understanding of that. And here's a guy who, started a business without having any experience in business, without ever having been an entrepreneur, and really never questioning whether he had a place to do that. So that's kind of going back to that marginalization hypothesis. But as far as the definition, you actually nailed it in that very first question that you asked your listeners. Have you ever felt like that's what it is? It's a feeling of intellectual phoniness that at any minute, people are going to find out that I'm not actually as competent as they think that I am, that I don't deserve to be where I got, and that it's all going to unravel at any moment, that I'm going to be discovered as being less than, essentially, that I don't deserve to be where I am.
One of the things that I've thought about with respect to imposterism is that whilst once upon a time you might have studied nursing and been a nurse and stayed in nursing for your whole career, you might have done teaching and done the same, whereas now you can do a teaching degree and eventually decide that you love graphic design and you can teach yourself graphic design and then open a business and create an Instagram account and create a website and start working in something that you don't have the, and I'm using air quotes here, qualifications for. And so many people, and it's what's so exciting, is we can do the work that we're passionate about, that really lights us up and that's meaningful without necessarily having the piece of paper. And I think that can really add to that idea that, hey, I'm doing this, I love it. You might be incredible at it, but hey, I don't have that degree. And I think new generations are coming through and probably thinking differently, but perhaps us Gen Xers, and it's another interesting question, isn't it? Is generationally, is it different? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can say anecdotally, I certainly don't see a lot of evidence that younger people don't experience this. I mean, Kim Kardashian was just on the cover of Time magazine and she came out talking about how she's dealt with imposterism. I mean, it really does seem to kind of universally affect all ages. And I think this is a really interesting point you're making that, yeah, it makes sense that we might feel this imposterism when we're doing something new, if we're having a career pivot, if we start a new side hustle. Of course, we're at the bottom of a learning curve. So it might make more sense that we're just not feeling as confident. But interestingly, there's this idea or maybe hope that if I just achieve this one more thing, I climb the ladder, get this award, do this thing. You read off my list of accomplishments. I still absolutely feel it all the time. It seems to be that we think that we can outrun it, that if we just make our resume impressive enough, eventually we're going to feel confident because we've racked up all these achievements and accomplishments. But the thing is, the higher you climb, the more you're expected to know. So if you're just at the beginning of a learning curve, in some ways, yes, you probably feel some imposterism. And also there's sort of a recognition of it's okay for me to not know everything at this stage. And as you move up, there is an expectation, right? The CEO is supposed to know more than the person starting in the mailroom. And so the more you're expected to know, even if you don't feel like you actually know that much more, the imposterism can grow, or, it can stay the same, or it can grow. And certainly for some people, it gets better, or maybe it gets better in some areas, but not in others. I had one person I interviewed for the book who, I mean, gosh, you should see his resume. This thing is something to behold. and he experienced it for a long time, and he is an immigrant. He's a Black male. He was adopted. He has a really, really fascinating story. and is a physician and just incredibly impressive. And so he did say that over time, his imposterism improved because he found himself in settings where the message was, if you are here, you deserve to be here. Like, this is an elite place. And if you have made it here, you have only made it here because you are smart and you deserve it. And it was that sort of like constant messaging that he ultimately was able to internalize. So I imagine it depends on a number of different factors, but it is certainly not the case that as long as you just keep accomplishing stuff and moving up, you'll definitely not have it at some point. And in fact, I interviewed a friend of mine who's also incredibly impressive. And in our interview, she literally said to me, but how do you know if it's imposter syndrome or you're just really an imposter? And the reason she was asking me that, she's like the CEO of a healthcare company. And she was asking me that because she was still feeling so much like an imposter. And for her, it was because she works in the biomedical industry. And so everyone she's surrounded by has very advanced degrees. And she just has a bachelor's degree. She's brilliant and she's been extremely successful with quote unquote just a bachelor's degree. But she's in an environment where she's comparing herself to everyone else and noticing this thing that they have that she doesn't have. And so for her, that feeling like, but maybe I really am an imposter, has stuck around.
Yes. And I imagine that so many people that might work for her and know her would be very surprised to learn that she thinks that way, because it's not something we want to talk about. It's not something that you want to voice. I know when it was really strong for me, I would only talk about it with my mum.
Yeah.
And I can talk with mum about anything and everything. It wasn't something, I've got a great relationship with my husband, Peter, but it's funny, isn't it, that I don't recall ever having that conversation with him, because perhaps somewhere deep inside me, I questioned whether or not he would get it. And whereas I knew my mum would get it. And so I love that we're having a conversation about it. This is going to open a lot more conversations about it. And just the fact that once you understand that it's so common, it's incredibly common, and there are reasons for it that we understand, and you're obviously sharing some of those with us today, it's going to help people, I think, shift even just a little bit, just to start to observe it and maybe get a little bit curious about it and talk to their friends about it. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation.
I am too. And honestly, this exact thing you're saying is really what prompted me to write this book. So I had done this panel at a conference about imposterism, and actually imposter syndrome, because that was before I had really researched and understood this languaging issue. And I recruited 4 or 5 like really badass women whose resumes were just like, wow, right? Who were women I knew had experienced this. And so basically the panel was all of them. You know, I did a little intro to this is what it is, and there are these 5 subtypes, and we can talk about that if you want. And, you know, this is who has it, who's vulnerable to it. It was a little 5-minute thing. And then they all told these really personal, kind of heartbreaking stories. Like, they were crying, everyone in the audience was crying. And the response to that panel was like one of the most powerful things I've ever experienced, because we had all these people come to us and say, oh my gosh, you who have done this and this and this, you, this person I look up to as so accomplished, who I assumed must be the most confident person in the world, you feel this way too. And yet you were still able to do all these things. So maybe I can doubt myself and still choose to move forward with like the big, bold things that I want to do in my life too. So just opening the door to have the conversation and admit to having these feelings really inspired a lot of people. And I thought, gosh, we need to keep talking about this. And, you know, that's where the book came from. I really love seeing that the conversation seems to have become a little bit more common out there in the world.
It's so relatable. It's so relatable. And it's something that I wonder if people fear voicing, for fear that if I voice it, I'll be questioned. And that,
for sure.
Yeah. Is that something you found?
Or I'll look weak, or, you know, that I think it's exactly right. They'll question whether I am competent, which probably won't happen, but that's the fear of what will happen.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
The 5 subtypes, we're all keen to know. Please tell us
Sure.
about those.
So this is from the work of Valerie Young, who is an expert on imposterism. She wrote a book quite a long time ago that has a lot of really good information in terms of what imposterism is and the research behind it, et cetera. Her approach to how to deal with it is very different from mine, but I think a lot of what she wrote about is really valuable. And so she identified these 5 subtypes, and essentially people have a way that they try to prove their competence. So, like, if I feel like I might be found out as a fraud, the way I avoid that is by doing X, Y, or Z thing. And so that's really what these subtypes are. And so one of these is called the perfectionist. And so that's pretty self explanatory. I just try to do everything perfectly in order to prevent people from finding out I'm a fraud. And of course, nobody can do everything perfectly. And so ultimately, small mistakes kind of reinforce this message. Oh, see, I'm an imposter after all. There's the soloist. This is the person who believes that doing anything with a team or asking for help or needing input, this kind of proves that you're a fraud, that you should be able to do everything competently on your own and not need help. There's the natural genius. This is the person who thinks you either have it or you don't. You have this innate intelligence. And so if it takes me longer to learn something, if I don't get it on my first try, this must mean that I'm incompetent and I'm a fraud. There is the expert, and that's what I am. The expert is the person who thinks they don't have quite enough knowledge, expertise, experience, and so they have to take one more class, get one more degree, do one more certification, read one more book, listen to one more podcast before moving ahead with what they're doing. And Jody, you're nodding, so that sounds like that one might be the most relatable to you.
Yes.
And then the last one is the superhuman. And this is the person who feels like they should be able to juggle all the balls on fire on a unicycle, flawlessly and unruffled and smiling the whole time. And that if they drop a plate, or if they drop a flaming ball, this means that they're a fraud. And really, shouldn't they be able to like balance plates on their nose too? So it's like always, so it's kind of a combination of a couple of those other subtypes. I talk about this in detail in the book, and I give case examples of me as the expert and then 4 other people in those other categories. And if people want to learn their own, I actually developed a quiz that's on my website. So my website is just jillstoddard.com. And I think it's /quizzes if you just look for the quizzes. So you can take a quick quiz and then it'll pop up and it'll tell you kind of your top category. So you'll probably recognize yourself in more than one of these, but usually there's kind of one that's the main one, even if they overlap a little bit. And so the quiz will sort of say, oh, you're the expert, maybe 70%, but 20% perfectionist and 10% soloist, something like that.
Oh, I can't wait to do it. I think I know where I'm going to land. And nodding. Oh my gosh, when you were saying about just read this next article, listen to one more podcast. And it's so interesting because we're both passionate about acceptance and commitment therapy. And what I find myself doing sometimes is what probably most people do is you're on the internet, you're searching for something, you're researching something, or you're preparing, and then there are rabbit holes galore. We can go in so many different directions, and I'll end up with all these tabs open. Oh, I must read that. I must read that. I must listen to that. I must watch that TED Talk. And then what I've been able to do, which has been, and I think perhaps this has really helped me with my own imposterism, is I've been able to go, okay, take a moment, zoom out. What are you up to? Okay, is this important? Is this really important for you to do right now based on what task you're doing? Obviously, this is a productivity thing as well. Are you getting sidetracked? Are you procrastinating? And then I can realize, hey, you know what? For the work that I'm doing on this particular project or for this particular client, I've got everything I need. I can shut those tabs or I can bookmark them for later. And I've got a little tab in my email that's to read and it's full and I've never ever visited. I just put things in there and I never go back. But the idea that I can observe what I'm doing and make that decision about is this necessary or not, I think has been really helpful. But for a long, long time, that's exactly the way I operated. And when I add to my suite of speaking topics and I'm starting something new, and I know as a speaker, you'll relate that something captures our attention and then we're like, oh, this is really important. This is something like with your new book, for example, this has been a learning curve for you as you've been researching the book and talking to people, and we'll always be doing that throughout our lives. And so I think what I'm recognizing about myself is that I'm at a place at the moment where an imposterism isn't something that shows up, but I think I'm going to be welcoming it back at some stage as I try new things and go back to that learning curve. And that's, I think, a realization for me. And perhaps it comes in waves depending on where we're at professionally and what we're doing. And
Absolutely.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And, and with the expert piece is there's nothing wrong with lifelong learning, especially if that's something you value. But with this expert imposter thing, it's like if you are doing only learning and not the doing, sometimes it can kind of keep people stuck and like not moving forward with the thing they want to do because they're waiting to feel like they're ready or they have enough.
Yes.
And I always get the image in my head. It's like pouring water into a cup, but the cup has a hole in the bottom of it. And like it never quite gets full. And if you wait for it to get full, you're going to be waiting forever. And, I was invited onto a podcast shortly after that panel that I had told you about. I was invited onto a very, very big podcast and I had never even heard of them. And I'm looking at the email invitation. And at first I thought it was a scam because that couldn't possibly be, or that they made a mistake because it wasn't me. And it turned out it wasn't a mistake. It was somebody worked on that podcast who had been to that panel and was really moved by it and wanted me to come speak. And oh, did the expert thing get triggered there? Because I truly was not an expert in imposterism at that time. I had done a little bit of reading and research and I was very interested in it. But I thought there's no way that I can do this. And I really had to get to a point of remembering that I am an expert in a number of other things we were going to be talking about on the podcast, acceptance and commitment therapy, like you said, and anxiety. And ultimately that I knew enough to talk about it intelligently for 1 hour. And that's all I needed, right? I didn't need to know every single thing there was to know about imposterism to do a 1 hour podcast interview. Of course, I needed to know more to write a book, and I learned that, right? But so I think that's a good point that you're making, is recognizing what is called for in this situation. And there's some research that shows, I might get this number wrong, but I think it's that when men apply for jobs, they only need to meet about 60% of the qualifications in order for them to like go ahead and apply. Whereas women will not apply unless they meet 100% of those qualifications. So that's going back to that sort of marginalization and these other pieces. And so I think that's really key, is recognizing, like, do I have enough in order to do most of this job competently? And can there be some wiggle room to also like learn on the job? Like, that's okay. I don't need to know every single thing there is to know about every single thing. Nobody ever does. And it'll hold you back if you wait for that day to come.
It is. It's impossible. And exactly what you said, I really appreciate that you've given us that visual of that cup pouring into that cup where there's a hole in the bottom. And we are so privileged to have access to so much information, but it can be paralyzing. It can be paralyzing.
Yes.
And there's another visual that was shared with me along the way, not me probably personally, but in a group situation, or I've read it somewhere, but it was this idea that we can only see what's possible when we take a step forward. From where we are, if we stay at the start on a picture stepping stone. So if you're on the first stepping stone, that what's possible from the 10th stepping stone cannot be seen from where you're standing.
Ooh, I love that.
Every time you step forward, which takes courage, and we'll talk in a moment about what helps and some practical ideas. And obviously there's anxiety, there's these what if questions. What if I embarrass myself? What if I don't know the answer to a question that somebody asks me? first time anybody's ever done a podcast interview or spoken in front of a group or put their hand up for a role at work that they don't have the piece of paper for, or maybe learning on the job is a huge part of it. We've all been there at some stage. And this idea that the more you step forward, the more you can see. And I was recently talking to somebody who's contemplating starting a podcast. And I'm approaching my 100th episode of weekly episodes, and I'm really proud of myself. And I said to her, I took a moment and I said, I'm just going to take a little moment here because here's me on this side of the sort of the podcasting fence where I don't know everything there is. I haven't been in podcasting even 2 years, but here's me talking to someone who's where I was not so long ago. And I've learned so much, I've made mistakes, but I've got so much that I can teach to someone who's just beginning. And I did. I took a moment to go, hey, I never would have thought I would be here giving advice and sharing ideas with someone who's just starting. The only way I got here was to move from that very first stepping stone. And anxiety is obviously a big part of it. So can we start to talk, please, about anxiety and imposterism and what people can do that's going to help them to recognize it and to move forward with it, even if it's something that is going to really be part of the journey, which inevitably it is, especially when anxiety is involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to what you were saying about being big fans of acceptance and commitment therapy, to me, the answer to anxiety, to imposterism, to all of the difficult thoughts and feelings that threaten to get in the way is learning how to build psychological flexibility. So that, and you have already talked about this on your podcast, but it's that ability to be in the present moment with all of your difficult thoughts and feelings, the ones you like, the ones you don't like, fully and without defense, being aware that they're present, opening up to them, allowing them, and then really making conscious, deliberate choices to move in the directions that matter to you, to really be thoughtful about what do I want out of my life? And can I feel fear and step onto that next stepping stone anyway? Can I worry that I might be found out as a fraud and step onto that next stepping stone anyway? And I tell my clients all the time, like, gosh, I wish that I could wave my magic wand and take all of this stuff away, but it's just not how it works. Like, part of being a human being is to experience difficult thoughts and feelings. And all of that stuff really is there for a reason. It's there to protect us. It's there to help us. It just doesn't feel comfortable all the time. And, in order to live the lives that we want, it really takes a lot of courage and willingness to make space, to allow that to be a bit of a co-pilot, or maybe not a co-pilot, because you don't want it to have a say in which direction you're going, but like a passenger, you can be in the back seat and I'm going to just, drive you along with me. But I'm going to be the one in charge of the steering wheel and keeping my foot on the gas, if you will. There was a woman that I interviewed on our podcast. Her name is Maho Malfino, and she wrote a book called Break the Good Girl Myth. And she, we all in psychology like to talk about comfort zones, but she talks about it like if you kind of picture a circle, and that's the comfort zone. Of course, I'm making a circle with my fingers that no one can see. But if you picture a circle as a comfort zone, and around that circle is a dashed, dotted line, what Maho calls that line is your vulnerability edge. And she says, you don't have to dive 1,000 meters outside of your comfort zone, because chances are if you do that, you're going to come running right back into the middle, curl up in the fetal position and be done, right? All you have to do is step just past that vulnerability edge. And if you do that consistently and you're willing to feel the fear and do it anyway, then that comfort zone gets larger, right? The vulnerability edge expands out a little more and a little more and a little more, which is similar to what you're saying about the stepping stone and the stepping stone and the stepping stone. And that's it. There is no easy fix it way of do this or do that. And you'll feel, this is what all the Google searches are. Here's how to build confidence and self-esteem and 5 simple ways to change your thoughts. I mean, great. If people can do that, fantastic. I've never been able to do it. And then I feel like a failure when I don't successfully convince myself that I'm awesome or magically get rid of my anxiety and build my self-esteem and my confidence. I haven't been able to do that. And I have lots of psychology skills, but psychological flexibility lets it be okay that I can experience those things and choose to move forward anyway with them. And then you learn through experience, like, oh, the bad stuff my mind keeps telling me is going to happen usually doesn't actually happen. But even if it does once in a great while, it's never as bad as I think it's going to be. Oh, and I can handle it. And you can only learn that by taking that first step onto the stepping stone. If we just sit here and rely on our mind with all of its rules and assumptions and predictions, we're never going to go anywhere, because the world is scary if you listen to your head. But if you move your feet, then your experience will teach you, like, you've got this, you can do this.
Yes, and you remind me what two other guests on this podcast have been saying, and Yael Schonbrun is one of them, and she's obviously your co-host on Psychologists Off the Clock, and obviously a dear friend, and also Paul Taylor. So Yael was talking about moving with your feet, and this idea that you can have all of this happening, these thoughts, these ideas, these worries, these concerns, these anxieties, but still actually move. You can actually do it, even though that's coming with you. And Paul Taylor spoke about a particular guest on his podcast that spoke about going to the edge of ourselves, that every once in a while we should go to the edge of ourselves and look into the abyss, was the expression that this particular guest on Paul's podcast had used. And when we revisit and we go to the edge, that over time, the more that we do this and learn more about ourselves and take those steps outside of our comfort zone. He wrote a book called Death by Comfort. That edge extends. It's that dotted line, that vulnerability edge is a little bit further away. And I know we can both say to our listeners here that we've both done things in our life professionally, and no doubt everyone listening has an example that they can recall on where you are terrified. You've done a TED Talk. I mean, I hope I'm not making an assumption that was terrifying.
It was terrifying. Yeah.
And yet you did it. You did it. And it's this willingness is the word that you used before. Can you talk a little bit about willingness before we finish up? And even just one skill that might help listeners to become more present, to be able to be more of an observer, and that may help next time imposterism shows up.
Absolutely. So willingness is really the practice of making space for discomfort without doing anything to avoid it or push it away or change it in any form. And I have so many practices that I love that are actually really fun, because if you just say, stare into the abyss and go do the really terrifying thing, like just go do a TED Talk, you can do it. Going from a place of I'm not doing anything to, okay, I'll just go do a TED Talk. Good luck, right? That's not going to happen. That's way outside the vulnerability edge. And so I like to practice in ways that are really fun and playful, but benign as a way to start. Just like if you told me you wanted to run a marathon, I wouldn't be like, great, go get on Heartbreak Hill in Boston this weekend if you had never even taken a walk around the block before. You would train. And so these are practices I like to do to have people train to work their way up to the things that are maybe scarier, but most importantly, the things that are meaningful. This is not no pain, no gain. Like, don't just do things for the sake of them, but because it matters to you and it's something that you really want for your life. And so these practices are just practices. And so it's things like you and I could do this right now. We're both wearing headphones. So we could, and they're supposed to be, I have AirPods on. There's one that goes in the right ear, one that goes in the left. I can put them in the wrong ear. And then they're going to feel really awkward and funny. Or I can put my watch that's currently on my left hand on my right hand, and then it's going to feel wrong and heavy. Or take a shower that's a little too cold or a little too hot. Basically, anything that you do as sort of a routine or kind of ritualistic kind of thing, which really is almost all the things. Use your non-dominant hand. If you're right-handed, brush your teeth with your left hand. Good luck. You're going to make a big mess and it's going to be awkward and you're going to have a strong urge to go back to doing it the other way. Can you notice all of those experiences and just sort of open up and make space and allow them to be there without doing anything to alter or change it. You could put your shoes on the wrong feet for a little bit. So those are all kind of tactile. And you can do this with all of your senses. So you can listen to a piece of music you don't like and really just sort of pay attention to, like, listen to the guitar and then the harmony and then the lyrics, and do this without judgment, where you're simply allowing the experience to kind of land on your ears. You can do it with foods you dislike. So I have a box right here in my drawer of Bean Boozled jelly beans, which are jelly beans that are flavors like you don't know if it's going to be, strawberry banana smoothie or vomit flavored. And I ask my clients to purchase these and we eat them together in session. And of course, at the end of the day, they're all just jelly beans. But you're learning how to practice willingness toward an unpleasant flavor or sound. I use YouTube so much in therapy. We'll listen to nails on a chalkboard or a baby crying. We'll look at images that they find distressing. I had one person want to look at dirty bathrooms. I had another want to look at buttons, things that just bug people that they don't want to look at. And so you can use all of your senses to choose to lean in to discomfort and really practice, like, okay, I'm noticing that I scrunch up my face and my shoulders when I'm encountering this. And so can I lower my shoulders and let my face sort of smooth out? Can I use my breath? When I breathe in, my body literally expands. And so can I use that inhale to expand and make space for the discomfort that I notice in my body as I interact with these stimuli? And when I exhale, can I let go of the resistance? Like, not let go of the discomfort, let go of that unwillingness to not have it. And these practices are really powerful. And then once we do those, we might watch scary movies, jump scares, or really sad, the last 5 minutes of Marley and Me, which is gut-wrenching. So then we're practicing with emotions, which is a little harder than practicing with sensations. I might give homework to ride a roller coaster, or, things that people find some people love roller coasters like me. But if that's something that's hard for you, then that's a thing you could do. Or I've even started practicing the roller coaster with my eyes open and my arms in the air. So even though I like roller coasters, I usually scrunch my body in a ball and close my eyes. And now I try to open my eyes and put my arms up as a way to really challenge, to create a greater experience of willingness. So there are so many ways to practice this, and you can start with baby steps. Everyone's vulnerability edge is in a different place. And so to really think about, like, what are some small ways I can practice this? And then what's a slightly bigger way and a slightly bigger way, so that you can work your way up to the TED Talk or whatever your thing is, applying for a promotion or an award or speaking up at a conference or something like that.
Those examples are within reach of every single one of us listening. And I'm thinking as a parent too. We were watching Fail Army last night, which is a YouTube channel where it's kind of like the old funniest home videos. I'm of that generation. Many of my listeners will not know that what that was. Can you believe we used to record things and people would post them off to television stations? But anyway, Fail Army is hilarious. And there was a jump scare, and my daughter had seen what was coming. She goes, "It's going to be a jump scare, Mum." And oh my gosh, even though I knew it was coming, totally hit the roof. So it's
not comfortable.
It's not comfortable. Oh my gosh. And she knew it. She knew that was something that would, she forewarned me, and we all had a good laugh. But it's so accessible, isn't it? It's so accessible for us to use our senses to build this discomfort tolerance, I suppose. Is that how you would refer to it?
The way I like to colloquially talk about it is to say to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I gave a talk to some teens recently, and when I was talking with the conference coordinator, and we were brainstorming about what I would talk about, and I only had 20 minutes. That's a lot of pressure to give them something they can actually use in their life. And I said, if there was one thing that I could teach kids and teens today that I think would dramatically change their lives, it would be getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. Because everywhere we get stuck in our life, it's because we are unwilling to be uncomfortable. Willingness isn't about being comfortable being uncomfortable. It's about allowing discomfort. But I think it makes sense to people when you say get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes, it absolutely does. So Jill, you've shared so much with us. It's a fascinating conversation, and I know our listeners are going to be very keen to learn more about you and your work, and to pre-order your book or to keep an eye out on when that's released. How can people connect with you, listen to your podcast, and learn more about the wonderful work that you do?
Yeah, well, you can find me, all the things about me at my website, which is just jillstoddard.com. And my last name is spelled Stoddard. I am on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn. And so all of that is on my website. I think you can click to connect, and my books are there, my TED Talk is there. And then the podcast, as you've mentioned, is Psychologists Off the Clock, and you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Jill, so much. Really appreciate your time. Jill is coming to us at the very end of her day, and it's just the very beginning of mine. So, Jill, thank you again for your time. It's been an absolute joy listening to you and learning from you today.
You are so welcome, and the pleasure has been mine, Jody. I really appreciate you having me. This has been such a fun conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. It's always such a privilege to have you listening, and I'm very grateful. So thank you. And I very much look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jody Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodyrichandson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.